Welcome to Rocket Ship, the podcast where web developers learn the skills and secrets to ship awesome mobile apps. I'm Simon Grimm, creator of Galaxies.dev, and today's guest is Dan Stepanov. Don't confuse him with Dan Abramov, but his CV is definitely just as exciting. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm doing absolutely incredible. 6:30 in the morning, 6:44 in the morning in Los Angeles, and I got my coffee. It's a great day.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really pleased. We had a chat for about 5 minutes before we hit record. That was already epic. We should have pressed record.
It was good.
But anyway, we gotta do this now again. I tried to look at your CV online. It was really impressive to me. Can you brush the broad picture of what you did over the last years for listeners?
Yeah. So I started my career academically, like chemical engineering, and decided no, that's not for me. Somehow I finished it, but I sort of rediscovered programming through hackathons midway through college, and then just decided to do that. And my GPA dropped like from a 3.8 to 2.1. I don't know if that makes sense in how you guys quantify like academic success in Germany, but in America.
Yeah,
no.
Absolutely not, but I guess it's bad.
It's not good. It's yeah. And so then I proceeded to move to the Valley and work on tech stuff. My rent jumped from something like $600 to $3,000 or something stupid. And but I got to see the launch of Expo. Or Exponent at the time. It was 2016, I want to say.
Yeah.
In Palo Alto. And so that was really cool. But we've come a long way since then. I've been working largely on Expo projects, and I've done a number of different startups and have sort of gone from building applications using React Native and Expo to working on the tooling that React Native and Expo users, primarily power users, use to navigate that ecosystem.
Yeah, we'll definitely later talk about Create Expostack, which is, I think, basically your latest project, which looks amazing. You also got Snack for that, which is probably a bit older, but nonetheless, we're going to cover that. You mentioned Expo. Is it actually really in 2016? Have you been like one of the founding people, or have you just been around? Give me the story about that.
I pride myself on somehow like very fortunately finding myself in the room with just intelligent people completely accidentally, and that definitely was the case. I think Charlie Cheever started working on Expo with maybe James in the summer of 2015, and there was a launch then event, and I'm talking like maybe no more than 100 people show, right? And he's explaining what this is, and I was just there to see Charlie, right? Because this is like an icon to me. Like he is, I hear the name Charlie Cheever, Quora, right? Facebook,
he had like a game before, or a game builder or something. I think Cedric mentioned it before. Do you know what that was?
It does sound familiar, and I know he's known for a library at Facebook that's still being employed today. And then Quora, and I was living in the apartment of his former co-founder. Actually, I later found that out, and so yeah. Then I go to this announcement, and I'm like, I went up to him like after the talk, and I'm like, Charlie, I'm gonna be honest with you. I have no idea what you just said. Like, and the React Native had just launched, right? Like, we're talking like very early on. I was like, but it's just so nice to meet you, and I'm sure this is going places, you know. Flash forward like however many years later, right now my entire career is built on this set of tooling. So it's been a crazy journey.
Wow, what a great story. Have you been later also employed at Expo, or have you just worked as some sort of a contract, or have you done no work with Expo on a contract basis?
Yeah, I briefly trial worked with their team. And it was actually just an incredible experience. I've started writing a lot more, and I'm still actually currently writing something on that experience. But I've been teaching kids to sort of like backtrack a little bit. I've also been teaching kids to code on and off for a number of years, and I use Expostack to do so because it's just this quick, like you spin up into that environment. And I tweeted about like, hey, Snack like is amazing, but here's how it could be better, right? Particularly for this use case of teaching kids. And
Mhm.
Charlie, this is 7 years after that Exponent talk, what would later become Expo. And Charlie responds on Twitter, and he's like, basically, how would you like to do that? Like, how would you like to build Snack into that? And I was like, excuse me. Um, and then I just ended up, working on it. And we tried a lot of different iterations. The team is incredibly talented, absolutely some of the best people I've ever worked with. Um, and Charlie even came down to Santa Monica, like where I live, to try to figure out like a role that would work. The timing was just off. It's like
Mhm.
it didn't make sense at the time. And so I sort of now like work on tooling that I think should exist, but likely would never be made by Expo because they really do build things according to a specific ethos and a set of principles. And um, we obviously see the result of that work, and it's incredible. But I think that there are a couple of things that are worth challenging, and ultimately the important thing is that the end developer and the end user see the best experience, right? So I have this
Yeah.
like dynamic. It's like an odd thing. Like I can't even personally name it, but we're all on still good terms. Like they're incredible people. Like I still chat with them.
Yeah, I completely agree with the tooling around this, and I think this is actually a very interesting market. So this is pretty much the same like with Superbase. So a few years ago, Superbase came up as like the Firebase alternative, and now you see every here and there tools around Superbase come up, and I think Expo is exactly the same. Like Expo is I mean, it's you said it's 2016 when it got started as Exponent, but I feel like it is just getting started the last 2 years. So people were always complaining like, oh, Expo Eject is so bad, and we hate Expo, and it's so different. And it's just this year that it starts that people accept. Oh, actually, Expo is not that bad. Actually, it's actually pretty good. Maybe we should use it. Like everyone should use Expo. And
Yeah,
so I guess the
it's
next 1, 2, 3 years, there will be tons of cool tools around Expo that we still need.
it's really interesting to observe how people perceive Expo, and I think that's really where I like to dig in, and that's a lot of where Create Expo Stack kind of really comes in. Is that people they're coming at Expo from very different backgrounds, and I came at it from originally developing an Objective C in Swift, and I take that native understanding and bring it into JavaScript, React, and React Native. Um, but most folks don't do that. Expo has tried really hard to build very, very strong tooling around exposing some of these native things to JavaScript developers. But I don't think you should ever really go into the Expo ecosystem expecting it to be like, oh, hey, I'm a React dev. Like, I'm going to step into, or I'm a web dev. I'm going to step into Expo. And this is just the way web devs make mobile apps. It's like, no, it's it's a bit more than that. You do actually have to understand how mobile functions, and I think that'll be even more true actually moving into the near future. Things like Expo modules is just phenomenal for what you can do with it, what you can build, and similarly like Expo pre-build, right? The ejecting thing to that effect, like I've recently talked to a lot of folks about this. Brand is incredibly important in terms of developer tooling. And the reality is if you can either work on your brand and choose to acknowledge that it's important, or the brand and reputation will be determined for you. And I think that Expo has somewhat battled with this over the last few years, and the ejecting thing is still very sort of present internally as a discussion. There's a huge perception still that ejecting is like a thing, and it's not quite really. So not only are you like picture yourself at Expo, not only are you sort of working on the tooling of the future, but you're also sort of battling this past perception of what people thought about Expo even just 3 years ago. And so it's a really challenging thing to do.
It kind of feels a bit like so. From my background as a web developer, I kind of come from Angular, and so I've been through the whole Angular JS to the actual Angular thing, and it kind of feels like Expo with Eject is basically the same. So Eject is the Angular JS, and then Expo is now the new thing. And people still hate Angular because of Angular JS and the break that Google did back then. Really, like 7 years later, I still hear, "No, I will not use Angular." You know, back then when we switched from Angular, everything was bad, and it's kind of the same with Eject. Like you do one mistake in like one bad decision. Like Eject at that time was probably like it was not a bad decision. It was just like, yeah, let's do this. Let's give folks the option to eject from us, and then they can do whatever. And it just like it's just like a stigma to Expo. I don't know why.
It is. It is. I think it's worth sort of embracing the stigma and trying to power through it. I think I'm excited to see the future of like pre-build and what the marketing really like what the brand around pre-build is, because it's so incredibly powerful, and so much of the work that I do now for various organizations is employing pre-build. And so for someone who knows what they're doing um, and kind of wants to dig into that while not really, because the value of Expo at the end of the day, in my opinion, is there's this sort of there's the business logic of your application, right? What you actually want to do, and then there's the native bits, what makes a platform mobile, and Expo does an incredible job, especially if you come mentally equipped for it, of abstracting away those native bits um, so that you can reasonably move forward on your business logic. And so ejecting was an attempt to give people more control based off an assumption that the development experience could exist inside of these sort of like bumpers, right? Like this is what it can be, and this is what people want. And once people sort of shifted like slightly out of that, they were like, okay, well, you can eject. And it's like, well, yes, but dear God, what an experience to eject, right? And Expo learned that lesson the hard way. Is like, sometimes you fuck around and you find out, and so they've fortunately kind of pivoted properly out of it. I think the only thing remaining is to create this very seamless experience around the alternative, which is pre-build. And it's not even. I could go on about pre-build. I've had so many conversations about it, and it's just so powerful. It's so amazing. Um, yeah.
I completely agree. We could probably talk 20 more minutes about pre-build, but I would also like to cover your snack for that and the Create Expostack application. But I just want to rewind to, did you actually say that you are kind of the creator behind snack.expo dev? Like not only
No,
the
no.
idea, but you also actually worked on implementing it, or?
Okay. So Charlie created Snack, like snack.expo.dev. I think in like a weekend
All
or
right.
something, way back. I don't remember when. You can check the commit
Yeah,
history.
of course.
Um, I People normally use it for debugging, recreation, different purposes. But I was using it to teach kids to code um, to varying degrees of success. It is not built for that. And I think Charlie has this sort of, like this like that idea of like when you look at your kid and you're like, you're capable of so much more, like he sees what Snack could be. Um, and when I expressed this interest, he was like, okay, like let me pull this person in who might share that kind of desire to do that. And ultimately I ended up like the realization was that like Snack is not like a it's a very big top of funnel source for Expo, right? A lot of people will be brought into Expo through Snack,
Hmm.
but it doesn't actually generate any revenue. And also, it is one of the
Hmm.
most financially taxing things for the organization. And so I was quickly moved into working on other things. And so I went from working with Cedric very frequently to working with Evan a little bit more. Um, and so I didn't create Snack. I briefly worked on it. I
Okay.
personally believe that there is a much more powerful and robust tool to be built. I think most of the team agrees with that. Um, Snack was a very good start, but ultimately Charlie created it. Um, Expo Go is just limited, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I had Cedric here on the podcast a few weeks ago or a month ago, he said that he actually wants to put a bit more time again into Snack and implement some functionality. So I'm just on Snack Expo Dev and see there's actually now a button to open with Orbit, and the Orbit extension for Mac was just announced like, I don't know, 1 or 2 months ago. So probably he already did something. But yeah, I see. I also see the value of Snack, and there's actually something I wish that would exist. Like I'm also trying to teach people, just as you try to teach kids. Maybe I'm trying to teach a bit older people, but I would really like to give them like quizzes or something, like fill in the blanks here in this, here's the code snippet, and now go ahead and fix it and do this in an easy way. And I think with StackBlitz or other editors for the web, you get this really cool for the web already. Or I think Firebase or Google, they're also working on some kind of editor. So yeah, if we had a better tool for Expo where we could like share stuff, and yeah,
I
if
mean,
you had more time, that would probably
yeah,
be something for you.
it's somewhat the next step, but we can speak to Create Expo. I took a lot from the experience of working on Snack with Cedric. And by the way, like huge shout out to Cedric. He is one of the most incredible people I have ever worked with. Incredibly talented, incredibly humble, takes the time. He is like, if you were to have a boss or like you just graduated and you want someone to sort of show you the ropes, Cedric is the person. He is phenomenal. I cannot sing his praise loud enough. And he, bless his heart, took all the time in the world to try to explain how Snack works, right? And part of the issue is that it's really convoluted. It's very much built in this sort of like layering. You know, how, like the Chernobyl like reactor has like layers of cement on top of it and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
It's kind of like that, and then there's a chunk of it, in fact, that is Snackager, right? The bit that actually like figures out, okay, this is all of what you want. Let me turn that into something meaningful, return it to you so you can see what, that running. It actually bundles everything. And that's the part that actually makes working on Snack for other people outside of Expo impossible. And so I love that Cedric wants to do more with it. The problem is that he and a select group of other people are going to be the only people who can do that, because you can't really meaningfully, to my knowledge, or at least at the time, recreate Snackager, which is a core component of running it locally. Um, and the debugging experience for Snackager, or for Snack in general, is kind of challenging. So when you build things, what's the lesson here is like, when you build things, you really, if you intend for them to be extended beyond yourself, then you have to be very mindful of how you're constructing that. And I take that lesson forward into everything that I build, including Create Expostack, right? Um, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect segue to talk about Expostack. Actually, we're gonna just I just want to say one word about Snack for that. I think it's the project that came before. It was meant as sort of a library of snacks, I guess. Is it still active? Is it still under development? Do you still see potential for Snack for that, or is it like, yeah, an old thing we should
Snack
just
for
ignore?
that, Snack for that was definitely a precursor. It walked so that Create Expostack could run. It was a collection of, I should say, it is a collection of a lot of isolated implementations of things. I don't really add to it. If I see something meaningful, I will. Its primary limitation is it's ultimately limited by its environment, which is Snack, right? Snack operates within Expo Go.
Mm-hmm.
Expo Go has limitations on what it can do. And in fact, the most powerful and impressive and memorable slash iconic aspects of Expo are the native components. And so they're things that you would run in the dev client. And so I am trying to shift more to how do you easily spin up that dev client and how do you share and collaborate within that. And I think that to your point of like teaching people, I think that is where the power is we need to figure out a way to meaningfully share the dev client experience so that you are unbound in like what you create with Expo, right? Whereas Snack and subsequently Snack for that is always going to be limited in that capacity.
That sounds really amazing. If in the future you could work on that, I would be really, really happy to see and test the results. But you actually did something probably even better, at least at the moment. So to be honest, I shied away from expostack.dev simply for the reason if I do a tutorial, I kind of want to tell people, yeah, just use the default tooling. So I also usually use Style Sheet because that's like the common ground for all the people. And so I also use just the Expo CLI until now. But I get increasingly frustrated with the Expo CLI because I can't find the right template. So just today, just to give you an example, I did a tutorial on how to create a custom side menu, so a draw navigation with Expo Router. To make that process easy, I started it with the Expo CLI and I had to use the tabs template because that's actually the only template that does have the Expo router and the file-based routing set up. So I basically always use initialize tabs template and we're going to do now a draw navigation. So let's remove everything from the app folder and
Oh my
start again.
God.
But still, it's still the easiest way with the Expo CLI right now. I know Expo has tons of templates, but it feels like most of them are outdated. So there's just like 4 or 5 at the moment. You got like blank TypeScript, the tabs one, and that's pretty much it. So expostack.dev, is
Yeah.
this the solution to all my problems and even more?
It is the beginning of the solution to all of your problems. I want to give credit where credit's due. Create Expo app operates under, which say Expo's own CLI, the one you were talking about. It operates under this sort of core principle, a set of core principles. Like one, give people very minimalistic, right? Like blank slate, because then with every single thing that you implement, you're learning, right? And so it's important that you understand every single thing that you're implementing, uh, particularly in the JavaScript ecosystem where it's so easy to just move quickly that people don't think about the maintenance and they don't really approach it in a first principled way. By forcing the person to go through one thing at a time, they understand it, right? They understand what they've added. They understand the files that the configuration files or whatever. And that's great. That's a really, that makes sense. However, it only makes sense the first time. And if that tool is going to be used subsequent times, right, you're going to spin up other projects, you want to test things in isolation, it's not really meaningful. And the other thing that Create Expo app, the other sort of core principle that it's built upon is, and I think this comes directly from Evan Bacon, all user input is error, right? Is that the experience that you get should be agnostic of any input, right? That you should just sort of like hands free have it work. And I think that is a good principle for a lot of things. This is not one of them. And here you run up against power users of Expo versus people getting started with Expo, right? And it might serve one of those audiences, but it doesn't serve the other. And I don't think Expo really like makes a very intentional statement of we are for this audience versus we are for that audience. And so when I set out to make Create Expo Stack, I started again from those like first principles, like what on a ideological level is this about and how is it different? and that still rings true as I continue to move forward with it. And I wanted to challenge that all user input is error conjecture. Like I vehemently disagree. Like I'm against that. I think actually power users want configuration. It's very important. And a result of the way that Create Expo app has gone about it is that you have all these templates, like you said, but they're sort of one-off. So even if they were up to date, which maybe they are, if you knew you wanted native wind or style sheets, and you knew you wanted some navigation library, and you knew you wanted Supabase, and this is just how you choose to build things, you would have to go through and initialize 3 or 4 separate projects and then pull from them, like via those templates, then pull from them the requisite parts and construct this sort of Frankenstein monster of a thing that is all of them together.
Yeah.
So that they play nice, or you'd have to go through the documentation, and then you're taking a bet on the fact that these people, are keeping up with their documentation. That's not what you set out to do, right? You want to just build something. And so that is why Create Expostack exists, is because people just want to build things, And so I'm
I
not
completely
recommending
agree.
it.
I hate the experience currently. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not recommending it for first time. Like you should understand how these things work. And so we make an explicit statement. This is for power users. This is for people who have done this before, who are going to do it again and don't want to spend the time setting up native Wind v3, v4, Supabase, like SMS auth. Like these are not the things we should be spending our time doing. And it doesn't matter really what Expo's principles around that are. This is what the people want, kind of thing. So that's what Create Expostack is built on.
So with npx Create Expostack, I can configure my project pretty much out of the box. So if I go to the page, I see I can pass in whatever, Expo router, tabs, Tamagui, Supabase, style sheet, bun. How does all of this under the hood work? I'm really curious because in the past I tried to create my own. It was not in the Expo ecosystem. It was in a different ecosystem, but I found these bootstrapping tools to be incredibly hard to get right, because as you said, you're piecing together a lot of different things. You're piecing together Tamagui, you're piecing together Supabase, you have Expo and different routing concepts. How does all of that work under the hood? Could you give us the explanation for the regular developer?
Yeah. So I'll say the first time I assembled it, it's assembled in a very interesting way. I often say that it took like a month and a half or so to put it together. It's actually half true, because it was built in 2 sort of very quick sprints, each lasting about 4 days, where I didn't really go out. I didn't really do anything. I just kind of sat down and tore through some stuff. So initially the way it worked is that it was just templates. You would specify what you wanted in the CLI, and then based off of those, I just had template, like literal GitHub projects on branches of the Create Expostack repo, and it would pull that in. But then 2 or 3 configurations in, I realized I have 50 templates, and this is not sustainable. I can't do this. I'm just running into the same problem that Create Expo app kind of runs into. And funny enough, Create Vercel app, I think, functions in this way as well, or Create Next app or whatever it is. It pulls from templates. And so then once I realized, okay, people really like configuration, people seem to really be a fan of that, I had to rebuild it. And so the way it works now is that I learned about something called EJS, which is a blessing and a curse. You can basically configure these, and there's a diagram, by the way, in the contributing guide that highlights all of this, if anyone ever wants to take a look. But what you have basically is a base set of files that are shared amongst all Expo applications. And then you have a set of packages, right? And those packages are made up of files and file modifications, right? So let's say native wind, right? Native wind has files you need to add, the configuration file, And then it has file modifications to make, say in your app.tsx or whatever, that specify like this is how you have to actually write the styles then. And so the entire package can be considered a collection of the files necessary for it and those file modifications. And so you start with the base project and you have the packages that you want to add. And what Create Expostack actually does is that it goes through using EJS, where you can sort of introduce conditional logic into JSX files, JS files, whatever, JSON, and it will combine all of the requisite package files and take into account the file modifications. And then it runs a single generator function that goes through all of these EJS files and creates the project then subsequently. Because for a while, you just have a collection of those EJS files, and through the props that were passed into the generator function of like what navigation package you're using, what package manager you're using, it makes the requisite alterations, removes the unnecessary code, and then ultimately removes the .ejs extension on every file. And the output is your project. And that's great because it has two very important outcomes or side effects. One, it is incredibly easy to update a package like Nativewind to v4 very quickly, without very many changes. You bump something in a package.json, and maybe you change out the current navigation or the configuration file for whatever it is now. So even if the package undergoes a fundamental change, it's not that hard, and it just works for all the templates. And two, it's incredibly easy to contribute to and extend. And there's that lesson from like what I picked up from working on Snack, right? People are now just working and adding new configurations, making modifications to existing ones with no input on my part. And that is actually where I define success at this point moving forward, is how easy is it for people to extend this?
Yeah, I just checked it out, and this is actually kind of the same logic that I used for my generation tool. So again, I was in the Angular world, and it used Angular schematics, but the approach was kind of similar. We also had these files, and creating these files, which is in your case an EJS file, is really ugly. Like you have a lot of these if-else statements, just checking if props is to expo route, or if something is tabs, then print in these or do this. And the whole syntax highlighting in my editor never worked. I don't know if it worked for EJS, but it was a total pain in the backside to work with these files.
It is. It is.
But
it
I
is a bit
definitely give
cumbersome.
you the credit.
Yeah. It's that part is a little cumbersome.
It is totally easy to update it.
Yeah. I am sort of in the background simultaneously working on a robust testing library using Maestro from mobile.dev, and also a formatting tool for EJS files, because that is a slightly annoying aspect of it. The trade-off is incredible, though. Like, if you can put up with and you can always just change the syntax highlighting to like .jsx or whatever the file actually is, rather than EJS, and it should reasonably show you what it is, but it's not perfect by any means, for sure.
I also just saw there's at least one pull request. I talked to those people. So this is a pull request from Vexo. Vexo is doing analytics, and I talked to the team before. It's really cool that just pretty much everyone can now do a pull request and add his or her own stuff. I don't know how well Vexo Analytics fits into this. I'm not here to judge the pull request, but it definitely doesn't look too hard. So you already have, you have the basics. You have Nativewind and Tamagui, which you could probably use. You have either React Navigation or Expo Router. You have Supabase or Firebase. Are there any plans to like add more providers or more styling from your side over the next time, or do you consider it so far done from your end?
I consider it only done in the sense that like what I set out to do originally is done. However, there are a lot of other things that I am very fortunate to have the community that this project has. They're very comfortable taking on a lot of ownership. And so what we're discussing right now is, as we add more things, what remains core, so sort of part of the CLI itself, and what exists as an option that you can use if you say pull up the help menu or go to the docs or just know what you're doing, right? So there's going to be power users of Create Expostack as well. And the docs are really going to be the ultimate source for understanding that kind of thing. The reason that it's meaningful to continue building out configurations is at a certain point, and I think we're sort of already there, you can very easily do something like V0 for Expo with this, right? You can imagine yourself initializing a project by simply typing in, like, I want it to be this. And I think that's really powerful. Uh, is it going to be like the best? I always ask myself the question of, like, is this actually 10 times better than what it was before? I genuinely believe Create Expo Stack is 10 times better than Create Expo app. That I can confidently say. And the question now becomes, what is 10 times better than what Create Expo Stack is right now? And that becomes what's worth working on. And maybe that's just a separate project or problem space altogether, right? There's so much to do in the Expo ecosystem, but maintaining that focus and simplicity of experience is at the it's like the core principle of where we're at.
Yeah, I guess making this 10 times better is a very ambitious project for the future. For everyone, V0, you're referencing this AI prototyping thing from Vercel. I actually haven't played around with it, but I used ChatGPT to do something similar. So I don't know how well V0 works, but I think I will actually switch over to Create Expo Stack. And I do have an idea how I could contribute to this as well, because I just noticed that for Expo Router, you have the stack and you have tabs, but you don't have the drawer for the Expo Router. So that should be a pretty easy contribution to Create Expo app, Create Expo Stack.
Yeah,
should just be like one folder and one pull request. I could probably do this on the weekend.
And this is what
I
I
could
live
finally
for.
start applications with Expo.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying is, like, the fact that you want this thing to exist and that, like, in a day effectively you could pull it together. That's what I always wanted. I think these things aren't hard, and Expo has incredibly sophisticated tooling, but there's this, like, where you're at now and what you want, and then there's, like, what the tooling is capable of. And the question is, how easy does that middle part, like, how easy does anyone make it for you to go from point A to point B? And I'm glad that Create Expo Stack is making at least a dent in that journey.
Yeah, and I think that, Create Expo app, as you said, it's great. It has been great. I like to use it, and the people creating it are definitely brilliant at Expo. But on the other hand, I'm pretty sure that it's not going to be like Expo's main focus. So with every new SDK or with every new Expo router version, they probably gonna like add one or two templates, but then they have like 40 templates that are outdated. You don't know exactly which one to choose. So I don't know if they can actually, in a real world with a realistic approach, keep Create Expo app always up to date, always up to what we need. And that's not even considering stuff like Tamagui or Superbase or Firebase, which we can easily plug in with Create Expo Stack. And I'm pretty sure, like 99%, that a configuration tool for Expo that gives you Firebase or Superbase is way beyond what Expo would consider like, yeah, let's do this.
It's not in their wheelhouse, and actually, sort of the next phase of what I've been doing now is going to different organizations and saying, why do you even want to maintain an Expo starter, right? Like, what is it that you gain from that? And frankly, a lot of them just want to work on the core, right? The core technology, which makes total sense. And so I'm like, well, here you go, and I'll just send them, like, the NPX Create Expo Stack link that is their project, and I'll be like, just use this, you have a guarantee that it'll be maintained or whatever. And that's it, right? Like, why would you spend any of your time doing any of this, right? It makes little sense to me. I don't think people should spend very much time maintaining starters that aren't incredibly opinionated, right? Like Ignite's, Infinite Red's Ignite starter is pretty opinionated, great. There are obviously others, and I think those are worthwhile, but those are highly specific. But if you're just sort of throwing together for your library, like Vexo, it makes no sense. Like there's a lot changing. An SDK is dropped every 3 months or something. So it makes little sense to do this, and so I think that sort of feeds into the vision for the next step of Create Expostack, which is to be a portal into the Expo ecosystem. Like what does that actually look like?
Is this where you want to take things? Because as we initially talked, I know that you're interested in becoming like financially independent or building up whatever kind of revenue streams. And Expostack.dev is it's an awesome project for the community, but of course it's open source. And right now, I have a hard time seeing how anything like this could be monetized. I guess the whole community would scream out loud if you would suddenly monetize this. And I don't think that this is your idea. So, do you actually have a future plan for something that could build on Expostack Dev or anything related to it? Or why did you just do it because you love the community?
So it very much started to solve my own problems. It is growing beyond that into something that is meaningful, not just for individuals, but potentially organizations. Um, I think I'd like to see uh, a larger utilization rate, right? Like I'd like to see even more people using it and more buy-in before I considered charging for it. What I think people can do now is if you really care about its existence, then like sponsor the project, right? Like I'll figure out that component at some point. I don't really have a very good idea of what it, is, but one of the lessons, the YC lesson is like make something people want, and I very wholeheartedly believe in that. Is like I'm gonna build something and then figure out how to. I think the way to charge for it or ways to charge for it will be sort of this eventuality, and or what I think will likely happen is that I have learned a lot of stuff about the Expo ecosystem since just in the last month and a half of building this. Um, there's larger challenges, and things that people actually really would pay for. And some of those things I'm already working on. And I'm very curious to see the response to those things, which are more logical to charge for. So it's
Are
very
you willing
nebulous.
to share any of these challenges? Are you willing to share
So
the challenges of the ecosystem or what you're currently working on?
I since it's not like core to my like it's not my experience, like I didn't start the thing. I won't share what it actually is, but what I will say is the sort of principle that it originates from, which is that there's a lot of power in native. There's been a lot of effort put into native components by iOS via UIKit and from Google through Android. And as we move into a world where universal applications exist, a lot of people spend time thinking JavaScript is the interface for all of those things, and that we need to spend a lot of time building these sort of components, right, that recreate roughly or exactly what is being done natively. And I think that that's an incredibly wasteful approach. It requires a lot of time, and everyone's utilization is different. And so by taking advantage of the existing code and functionality and treating JavaScript as more of like just the interface and then a pass through of these props and behaviors, you can create incredibly performant and visually native experiences, both on web and on mobile. We're in this like really weird tumultuous time, even with something like navigation, right? And you see Expo Router going head to head with like different opinionated ways of how should navigation function in your application when on web it works this way, but on mobile it functions this way. And I think by embracing the native aspect of all of these platforms and not trying to impose a foreign pattern on one or the other, you're going to come out with the best developer experience as well as the best user experience. So that's sort of the background. That's the ethos behind it. Yeah.
I think that sounds really interesting. I'm sure in the future you can share more about this. I'm really looking forward what that project is going to become. I also think that I just want to mention it one more time because I want to round this up with Create Expostack is definitely a tool that I will pay more attention to in the future and probably use to spin up my videos. Before we bring this episode to an end, I just would love to go back a bit in history again, because I found your CV to be so interesting. I mean, your site, onlydance.gg, you list out all this stuff with Y Combinator and all your experiences. And while we have you, I would actually love to ask two questions. So the first question is, why did you win all these hackathons? So I just listed this out. You won the Whisper API prize, won the Top Cache prize at MHacks2, won the Evernote API prize. How in the world did you win all these things? Have you been just like the genius kid, or are you just smarter than everyone else?
That's such an interesting question. I don't consider myself the genius kid, and I was on teams. It's really important to highlight that like it wasn't just me. And but hackathons went through a very interesting phase when I jumped into them, where they went from this thing that corporations did not understand to now really like where they're eventually now at, which is they're just the modern day job fair, right? And at the peak of my experience, it was sort of like that the transition from one to the other is this silly event where people are just building things in the true sense of hacking, which is how do you use this thing in a way that it wasn't originally intended to be used. And it became really like, how do you spin together this like monstrous amalgamation of different APIs to try to win as many API prizes as you can. I guess at a certain point, I realized that there's a formula to like demoing, to like creating compelling tech demos, which is what hackathons are really about, right? It's like a science fair. At the end, you have that whole like walk around, judge, check out the projects. So if all that you can check out about your project is a laptop on a table, that's not going to catch the eye. There's a lot of projects like that. And so on the one hand, as long as you finish your project, you've already beaten 50% of the people there, right? If you just complete something, like you're already doing pretty well. And then the second part is like, if it's visually stunning and memorable, you stand a good chance to win. And I think once I like understood that and applied that to like, okay, you arrive at the hackathon in, let's say it's 40 hours long. First 12 hours, you build something that just works, and you're just iterating on that thing afterwards, so that regardless, you have something by the time you're done. So that's step one. And then step two, from the get-go, you should have something that's just like, holy crap, like it feels tactile, you can interact with it, or what have you. And that's what I just focused on. So I created these memorable experiences for at least the judges that were worth pointing out. Understand what the hackathon wants to do. They want the news to cover what's being built, so build them something newsworthy, kind of thing. So that was how it happened. If anything, it was just a lesson in marketing, the entire experience.
Very, very interesting, but nice. You found like code to win these.
Yeah.
I must admit, to be honest, I think I've never been in a actual hackathon in my life. So I talked to Vadim from Not Just Dev before, who's doing these startup hackathons now every year. And I know he said like when he was a younger, he did a hackathon in Moldova or something, and it was really impactful to him. And for you, I also found one of your, I think it was in one of your essays where you said hackathons were an eye-opening experience for me. So could you just explore or explain this a bit more? What hackathons mean to you and like your past and your current situation?
So I went to Penn State, and Penn State is it's a college town, right? It's a university in the middle of Pennsylvania, which is like farmland, and there's nothing for miles in every direction but cows and beer. And for what you have in that little town is a very small. It's a lot of alcohol, a lot of students partying, and then you have a small collection of like entrepreneurial or maker-minded students, right? So it's a very small group of us, and I was always really wanting to be around people who made things, which is why I majored in engineering. And then I got convinced to jump on this bus that was on its way to Michigan in the dead of winter. And I jumped on it and I landed, what was it? I don't remember how long. It felt like forever, the trip. But uh, when we got to Michigan and stepped into this stadium, their like football stadium where the hackathon was being hosted, and there were 1,000 people there. It's difficult to like register what 1,000 people at a hackathon is even, but at the time, what that meant and the energy that was in that room, it wasn't what we were doing. Um, what hackathons really ended up meaning for me is that there are people out there who just wake up and have this unquenchable desire to build, absolutely insatiable. And the other component of it that turned me away from chemical engineering actually was here are industry experts, right, from Hearst Corporation, from Facebook, from Apple, who are coming to 19-year-old, 20-year-old students and saying, how do we build this? Like, what do we do with this information? Like, and that was so incredible to me because it turned this whole dynamic on its head of, I'm going to go into the industry. I'm going to have to spend however many years gaining seniority, and then I can call the shots. Then I can create this impact. Then I can make decisions. But here is a skill set where for every hour that I put in, it's going to reward me. Like if I'm the smartest person in the room, I will be given the responsibility. And so that's what hackathons ended up being is those 2 points, right? Is that sort of ownership with technical know-how, and the fact that there's enough people out there and they're worth finding that have an insatiable desire to build for the sake of doing so.
Love that. Also, when Vadim told me about hackathons, I was also fired up. So I don't know if it's too late for me to join a hackathon. Maybe I'm just going to do it just for the experience, because I know it's like pretty much everywhere. You can just look at your local whatever. There's a university or something is going on in your city, and there's like always a hackathon. Some companies always running a hackathon. Mm-hmm. So yeah, probably I'm going to do that as well. Thank you for sharing your experience. Because you've been in that YC world and you've been to a lot of hackathons. So that was really also the formula for hacking hackathons is really helpful for many people, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Definitely go though. It's an incredible experience, and it's that forcing function that'll make you build something that you normally would be like, oh, this will take months. It's like, no, but like, what if it was only a weekend kind of thing?
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. The time constraint is definitely going to be challenging for me. Is there anything else regarding Expo and React Native that you want to mention that we forgot to talk about, or did we cover everything that we had on our list?
Mention no. Have you spoken to Fernando Rojo yet? Because if you haven't had him on, you really should.
I did, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I talked to him like last week. The episodes are always a bit delayed. I had to record a bunch in advance, so it's probably when this episode comes out, it's already live. So go check it out with Fernando Rojo. We talked about Solito, and that was unbelievable interesting as well. I'm still, that's an interesting thing to wrap it up. You could probably give your view on this as well as a last question. So Fernando is a big fan of using Solito with Expo and then combining it with an Next.js application. However, Expo Router is doing, well, it's a bit different because Expo Router kind of wants to do web on its own. They give you CSS support now with currently SDK 49, and you can also build universal applications. You don't really need Solito or you don't really need Next.js, and they want to do API routes. So Expo basically wants to do everything. What's your current take on this? Is Solito with Next.js a better option, although it makes things a bit more complicated, monorepository and stuff? Or would you recommend just go with Expo Router and hope for the best in the future?
It depends. It's just it really depends on what you're trying to do. But but I think generally I'm on the side of zero compromise. And so Expo Router is a great indication of where we're going, but it's not quite where we're at yet. And I think that Solito actually permits you as long as you're moving forward on the understanding that web navigation functions differently than mobile, there's no argument to be made there. Anyone who attempts to argue against that is wrong. They're talking out of their ass, frankly. Navigation on a website functions differently visually than mobile, and you need to account for that. And any effort to try to pigeonhole people into a mobile-based navigation for web or vice versa, a web-based navigation for mobile, is going to have a hard time. Probably the latter will be easier. So for the moment, I actually probably side with the Solito approach, but I'm very bullish on what Expo Router will become, because I think it's annoying to think. I don't want to. I'd like for it to be true that we don't write two sets of navigation and constantly have to worry about the bridge between them, right? Because that's really annoying. But going back to what I was saying earlier about that native experience is like, I actually don't think it's that tremendously terrible to provide the native experience to people with a shared interface that feels familiar. And therein lies the challenge. So I think the tool, it's not Solito and it's not Expo Router yet, but what it will be in the future is that uniform interface that provides a native experience for all the platforms, if that makes sense.
I wish for that to exist while I live, but with smart people around, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna witness this over the next few years. So, thank you so much for your point of view about that as well. To wrap it up, where can find people more about you? Definitely check out expostack.dev, but is there anything else, any place else where people can find you?
My website, onlydans.gg, is great. Twitter, my DMs are always open if you want to ask me any questions or are curious about what I'm working on next. And Twitter is where I'll also announce all of those things. So, yeah.
Awesome. So again, thank you for taking the time. I know it's been 6:30 in the morning, now close to 8 a.m. your time. Thank you for all you've done for the community. I'm looking forward to everything else.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
It was a pleasure, and I hope I'm gonna bring you on again in the future when you got something new for us.
I'm excited. All right, thanks so much, Simon.